Good morning, one and all. My name is Kurt Hoffman. I haven't been a member of this congregation for a while, but it's not important. Yeah. I've been selected this morning to introduce our first speaker, Dave Whilden. Now, that's not Dave Weldon. Dave Whilden. And I appreciate that he brought his own cheering section this morning. He's been a Christian for over 35 years, and he's been preaching in the Church of Seminole Drive in San Diego for over 15 years. Yay. Yay to all the preachers. Yay. And he's here with us this morning with his wife, Chris. He's been an elder for several years there, a self-trained preacher to teach the gospel with personal study and passion, in which we all should be. One of his hobbies is one I consider one of the best ways to experience God's creation. Not only can you see it, you can smell it, feel it, hear it, and even taste it sometimes. He's been doing it for over 50 years now. He surfs. A very unique hobby, and I like that hobby. This morning our series is on what does God require, and Dave's subject is to do justice. Without further talk from me, Dave will do it.
Yay, Dave. Keep that up, periodically. It's good to be here. You know, it's interesting when Kurt asked me to give him a bio, I didn't even know what it was. Usually I don't subject my style to anyone except those at Seminole Drive. You know, and I'm really tech savvy here. So we'll have a PowerPoint hopefully, but we'll see. What a great subject, though, really. What does God require? I'm here because I need to be reminded of that. It's an opportunity we can study together, but it's so much more than that. It's really to remind us of what's important in life. And I'm glad I was able to be invited and get a chance to speak to you. Do justice. I don't know how many of you got the flyer. And on the front page, what does God require? And I was supposed to do justice. That's all I got. That's all you got. That's all I got. So I kind of had to, I think what the first thing we need to do is define our terms. Because justice changes depending on who's doling it out, especially in our world today. And so we need to understand justice here. And there's some fancy words there. I keep looking back, but I have it right here. It is a verdict pronounced judiciously. And God determines justice. I do want to say something about Bob Owen. And have you ever had one of those, when I grow up I want to be like moments in your life? And Bob Owen is one of those people. I can't tell you how it's never happened to me before, being a group of people this size and have another David Whilden. Last night I talked to him for about 15 minutes to try to convince him he was the speaker. to no avail. Anyway, we want to look at that, but we want to define our terms, and I wanted God to make that call for us. So really, if you turn over to Proverbs or look at Proverbs, let me read a few things about Proverbs. To know wisdom and instruction, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive the instruction of wisdom, justice, judgment, equity, to give prudence to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. A wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. To understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles, The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. Again, the wisdom is determined by God or defined by God. And one of the other things that God plays a part in this is, I don't know, it's a concept that I'm having, I like to try to understand fully, is that not only does he define justice, he is justice. You know, it's kind of like Jesus said he was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He's the Word, as God is justice. And so, what does God require of us plays a huge part in that. Why do we do justice? Because God requires us to be like Him. Another passage that I wanted to read to prove that, or to talk about that, is in Deuteronomy, my favorite book. Deuteronomy chapter 32. And it's Moses singing, and this is about the best thing I can do for singing, is to sing like they sung. Chapter 32 is a song that Moses was singing. And it says, "Give ear, O heavens, and I will speak, and hear, O earth, the words of my mouth. Let my teaching drop as the rain, my speech distill as the dew. As raindrops on the tender herb, and as showers on the grass, I proclaim the name of the Lord. Ascribe greatness to our God. He is the rock. His work is perfect, and all His ways are justice. For God, a God of truth and without injustice, righteous and upright is He." You know why we need to do justice? Because He is just. And He is right. And so those are the kind of words that would just simplify things for me. Is righteous, and justice means to be right and do what is right. And God defines that because that's who He is. So I try to find one of the things that I always try to remind myself, as well as the members of our congregation, is you can't pull a passage out of context and make it say anything you want it to say. And so I searched diligently to find out where due justice is in the Scriptures, and I found it. And I thought about it at first. It's in Micah. And so I said to myself, kind of one of those obscure passages. When was the last time you read Micah? And I found in the Old Testament, it's the book of Micah. If you want to turn over there, we're going to go through that. And so I was looking at it in the context. And I noticed, and I wanted to clear up some terminology again. Old Testament, New Testament. Let me suggest to you that the only thing new or old about the Testament is the covenant. The Hebrew writer talks great length about the new covenant, the New Testament, the new relationship that God has with His people. So the only thing old about the Old Testament, it talks about another testament where God's people lived under. There's nothing old in the Old Testament about what God requires from His people. And so I turned over to Micah and I began to read it. And what I realized immediately is the people, Israel, the people that Micah was writing to during that time frame, are just like us. And our problems. And his world was just like our world. And so we can take instruction from Micah. And so I found it in Micah chapter 6. And I just wanted to kind of read through that. And we'll talk a little bit about it. The other thing, it says, "Hear now what the Lord says." And that's the other thing that you need to know, that I always remind the people that I'm preaching to, is by what is your authority? anybody that says anything or teaches anything, by what authority do you teach? And so when Micah was saying this and I was reading that, I wanted to know what authority he had. And in chapter 3 and in verse 8 it says, "But truly I am full of the power of the Spirit of the Lord, and of justice and might, to declare to Jacob his transgression and to Israel his sin." And so you go back and you look at chapter 6, and you continue to read, "Arise, plead your case before the mountains, let the hills hear your voice. Hear, O you mountains, the Lord's complaint, and you strong foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a complaint against his people, and he will contend with Israel. O my people, what have I done to you, and how have I worried you? Testify against me, for I brought you up from the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of bondage. I sent you before Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. O my people, remember now what Balak the king of Moab counseled, and what Balaam the son of Beor answered him, from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, that you may know the Lord, you may know the righteousness of the Lord. With what then shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." And again, the other speakers are going to speak on those topics, but just thinking about some of those passages. I thought about in Micah chapter 6 and verse 3, this idea, "O my people, what have I done to you, and how have I wearied you? Testify against me." I thought about some of the things that I say sometimes about what I need to do and what I have to do, and my relationship with the Lord, and it sounds much like that. I think of Job, in the book of Job, where God sounded like this when he talked to Job. Where Job has questioned God and didn't understand God and why things were happening to him. And in Job 38, God said, "Who are you to question me and bring a charge against me?" And they tried to do that with Jesus, and again, there were no charges to be brought. In verses 4 and 5, "I brought you up from the land of Egypt. I redeemed you from the house of bondage. I sent you before you Moses and Aaron and Miriam. O my people, remember now what Balak king of Moab counseled." And I thought about God taking him back, and what was God doing by writing those things or saying those things? Is really he was establishing his authority over them. It's amazing, he does it all the time in the New Testament. Who is this God Paul preached, or Peter preached, or the apostles preached? It was the God who created the heavens and the earth, and you and I, and has every right to counsel us, and to command us, and to direct us. And that's what God's doing here. Only it was interesting, he didn't take us back all the way to the creation. He took us back to the creation of a nation, taking them by the power out of Egypt, and showing and demonstrating that he was greater than all their fake and dumb gods. And then 6 and 7, "What shall I say then, or how shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of ram and 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?" It wouldn't do any good to give my son, my firstborn, for my soul sins. But God did for ours. And I don't know if it was talking about that in reference or not, but it is pretty amazing What's it talking about? I thought I was a person that exaggerated a lot. Thousands of ram and 10,000 rivers of oil. What's he talking about? All of the ritualistic sacrifices that people make to God is unimportant to him. And it's so interesting in some of this context there in the Jewish law of things, it was required that you offer oil and that you made sacrifices of animals that were blemish-free. And yet if you did that without justice and love and desire for God, putting Him first in your life, it does you no good. I thought about our worship today and what's really important. What does God require? And we've heard it ring throughout the Scriptures. As you read, you can turn to the beginning of the Bible and the end of the Bible and find out exactly the same thing. Give God all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. To put Him first in your life. One of the passages in the New Testament that just so impressed me, if you will, is the definition that Paul wrote to the Corinthian brethren about love. And I wanted to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, it reads, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and or angels and have not love, I have become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Though I have the gift of prophecy, I understand all mysteries. I have all knowledge, and I have all faith so that I could move mountains, but have not love. I am nothing." Thought about the kind of power it would be to have all knowledge and all wisdom, almost like Solomon, and having the wisdom of God in that body of his, and that mind of his, and yet not doing him any good because he didn't love God. We didn't put God first in his life. "Though I bestow my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing." In the same way with our sacrifices. The sacrifices that Paul talks about, that we're living sacrifices. And that we go to worship, and it's not about being there on Sunday morning and for Bible class and Sunday evening and Wednesday night. It's not about that. It's about loving God. It's about wanting to be there. I thought about the writer of Revelation. John wrote Revelation, and he was giving instruction to the 7 churches of Asia Minor. In chapter 2, he talks to the church at Ephesus. And he says, "You're doing awesome stuff." Well, he didn't use those words literally. But he says, "You're doing some wonderful things." And you can read that context about all the things that we're doing. And he says, "But I have this one thing against you, and I'm worried about you." And he says, "Because you've lost your first love." And so, when it talks about some of these things, we need to be concerned. And I think Micah really calls, why do we do justice? In 1 John, the first chapter, in verse 5, John writes, why? "This is the message that we have heard from him," Jesus, "and declare to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all. If we say we have fellowship with him and walk in darkness, we lie and do not practice the truth. But if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. And the blood of Jesus Christ, his Son, cleanses us from all sin." That's why you need to do justice. If you do justice, Paul writes to the Galatian brethren, if you walk in the Spirit, you're led by the Spirit, and therefore you will produce the fruits of the Spirit. Let me also go back and look at verse 5 of Micah 6. In verse 5, Verse 5. It says, that you may know the righteousness of the Lord. The righteousness of the Lord. Paul talks about the righteousness of the law. In Romans, it talks about the oldness of the old law, the old covenant, the Old Testament. And that it was a teaching stepping stone that they used, certainly for the first 10 years of the church, to convert people to Jesus. In fact, Jesus and John wrote in John 5, he says, you think you're saved in the Scriptures, and they talk about me. In verse 3 and 4, chapter 10, talks about the law and the righteousness of the law is the end that brings us to Jesus Christ. In chapter 4, talks about faith that we need to have, like the faith that Abraham had. What is that? You remember the story about Abraham giving Isaac his son, and offering Isaac up on Mount Moriah for sacrifice. And the significance to that of us today. Are you willing to give up what you love the most for God? Are you willing? That's what it's talking about. It's talking about that if you have that kind of faith, righteousness is imputed to you. That you are right with God. And so we're encouraged to have that kind of faith, the faith of Abraham, and to remind ourselves, what does God require? You know, the writer, Matthew, all of the book says, I want you to be perfect, my God. I want you to put forth diligent effort to be that way. I would be repeating myself to say any more. But I wanted to kind of close with something, as I see a lot of us gray hairs out there. I was thinking when I first was asked to speak on this, do justice. And what does God require? You know what I thought of is a great old comedian, Bob Newhart. I don't know if you know Bob Newhart. He did a skit, he had a show, and he did a skit. And in a skit, he's a psychiatrist, psychologist, or whatever, and he was counseling a woman that had a lot of problems, and he sat down with her, and she started to talk about things like she was claustrophobic, and going into elevators was a real trauma for her. And he said, well, stop it. And she said, well, what are you talking about? And he said, well, just stop it. And so she kept going on. She knows, do you have anything else wrong? Bob says. And she says, well, I get anxious in grocery stores and around a lot of people. And he says, well, just stop it. and she goes, what? He says, yeah, just stop it. She says, okay, anything else? and so when I got this topic, just do justice. Because that's the right thing to do. That's what God would want us to do. Because then we'll walk in the light. As He is in the light, we'll be light. And our light will reflect His glory. Amen. And it really is a definition of how much do we love God? What's important? What do we love more? And so, what a great opportunity. I commend the elders for the congregation to pick out this. In fact, we have a song service every fifth Sunday of the month, and what a great topic. What does God require? To love Him with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul. Thank you. I appreciate it.